Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Well, good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the new moon on January 20th in the Zodiacal sign of Aquarius. This new moon is sextile Saturn and a great time to put into form your unique talent, the one thing you do better than anyone else. The key phrase for Aquarius is, I know. So look for the thing you brought into this lifetime, something that is under your belt, comes easy to you, but not necessarily something you like to do. What seems to come naturally and effortlessly, then develop into something useful and enjoyable. So how can we contribute to the greater whole of the universe? So, Swami, I guess that's a great question to start with. Why don't you get us started with that?
Well, we all have this unique talent. We all have but we also have what's called Dharma, duty or responsibility to give back to the collective. That the universe gives us life, but it expects us to give back. We are an intricate part of something bigger than just personal desire. And so having a sense of connectedness to this greater whole, one of the things that I think it brings is this sense of purpose to an incarnation, which is extremely motivating and very productive of. The term is called enthusiasm that we always use, so that when you have this enthusiasm for your life, that everything kind of becomes easy.
So I would say in order to have this level of enthusiasm, we should start with maybe positive thinking.
Well, that's kind of an oversimplification of, something that we're talking about that is much bigger. But to answer your question, of course, skillful use of thought is really where we begin our yoga practice. And thinking right is an important, I want to say, topic to just kind of hone in on, because the real key question is, well, what is thinking right? Because that oftentimes is met with a lot of debate, because that's thinking right for you. And, who are you to say what's thinking right for me? But when you boil it down and you try and look at the human condition and you try and look at wisdom, the concept of thinking right is really using what you really do need, your number one need, as a source for validation, as the symbol that you use to produce the feeling in your body that you're okay. And one of the things that we discovered is that when we do that, something magical does happen to us that we call Kriya Yoga. So to answer your question, yeah, it's thinking right, but it's a very specific way of thinking, as opposed to most of us, the way that we're thinking is we're still thinking with what I call the old pattern. That our bodies come in with programming, that we look for food, mother, and approval for validation. And there's nothing intrinsically evil with it, but it's an interesting dynamic because, the new moon yesterday was in Aquarius, which is the sign in and of itself. I find it to be interesting. But the ruler of Aquarius is Uranus. And Uranus has a very interesting mythological story that goes with it. that I think can be really helpful with regard to the whole thing of this concept of separating from this pattern that we come in with. Because in the mythological story of Uranus, the Great Mother furnishes her son, Saturn, who is also Uranus's son, a flint sickle to use on the father. And the boy castrates Uranus and then takes the fallen phallus and throws it into the ocean. And out of the fallen phallus comes Aphrodite, Venus, the most beautiful image known to humanity. Very interesting story because if you really look at it and translate it in terms of Kriya Yoga physiology, because when you're looking at your chakra system, the path of descending prana starts at the feminine terminal of your third eye center, which is Cancer, ruled by the moon, the Great Mother. And it ends, it comes down and it touches upon the feminine terminal of your lower six energy centers. But it ends at the feminine terminal of Saturn chakra, Capricorn, which is ruled by Uranus, but also Saturn. So this conspiracy between the Great Mother and her son Saturn, castrates the father principle. Because Uranus really, by definition, is prana, the life force. And this pattern that our bodies come in with has this conspiracy that wants to sever us from this power of the creative principle. And when it wins, when the body wins out, when the pattern of your body wins out, then, of course, you wind up with Venus, which is desire. But it's desire for something tangible and visible. That's why Buddhism, they talk about, the origins of all suffering is desire. But to desire Aphrodite, to desire Venus, to desire something visible and tangible is the problem. Now, what I found to be really interesting is that Christianity actually came along with a different myth, which I always found to be the solution to the Uranus myth of, this castration theme. Because in the Christian myth, there is the crucifixion of the body, the resurrection of the Son, and the reunion with the Father. So the whole thing in yoga, what we're trying to do is we're trying to separate our identity from this pattern that we originally come in with, this pattern that we look for food, mother, and approval for validation. And we're trying to become addicted to this more subtle source of sustenance, this invisible, intangible source of sustenance. But it will produce a completely different experience for the human being when we do that.
Wow. So does meditating on our chakra system, does that, would that help assist us to, I know sometimes like we live in certain chakras, would that help us to elevate whatever chakra that we should be meditating on? Would that help us elevate our level of consciousness or try to break this pattern?
Well, again, to answer your question, it's kind of a, I want to say, difficult answer to give, but to try and put the answer to the question that you're asking in a way that I think that we might be able to understand that, it would be like saying, to work each chakra individually, it's like somebody saying to you, now what I want you to do is I want you to work your circulatory system. Okay, now I want you to get your heart rate up, and I want you to start to elevate, the movement of your blood through your veins and arteries. And of course, most of us recognize that, we do this like when we are exercising, but it means that you can't just isolate your circulatory system. That even, say, for example, if you could do it mentally, you would still have to engage your nervous system. And it would also, in fact, affect your lymphatic system, and it would have to affect your endocrine system. So to be able to, focus on each chakra is kind of like the same way. Like the mind and the body work the same way. The body's a diagram of how the mind works. So these energy converters, they kind of spin out everything, but they do it in the similar way that our bodies are put together. But a big part of it is just to know your chakra system and to understand how your creation or your reality is taking place is a really valuable tool. In the same way that it's important to understand, the different systems of your body. They work together, but they are also kind of separate. But to just focus on, Ajna Chakra, to me is, it's an oversimplification for a much more complicated solution. Understanding how your mind works, understanding how to program your mind in all of these different facets and petals of your mind is valuable, but then also understanding how it's all going to work together, just like how exercise works, the whole mind-body complex. And again, it's like you divide and conquer so you can unite and stand. You really want to see how things work together.
So that's what you mean when you say, like, to know thyself and then nothing in excess?
Well, yeah, that's a nice phrase, but to know thyself is to know ourselves in the way that we're created, which means that we have a physical body, we have an astral mental body, and we have a causal spiritual body. So even, say, for example, yesterday's new moon, very, very powerful configuration where you have that sextile to Saturn, which has now gone into Sagittarius. So good time to develop this kind of conceptual framework, to start to know yourself in the way that you're created, as opposed to just knowing ourselves when we're left to our own devices. Just being preoccupied with one or two departments of our lives or 5 or 6 departments of our lives, and neglecting all of these other aspects. And then also understanding that creation is taking place on 3 different levels. The interplay between matter, mind, and spirit. And these different dimensions of our makeup, they correspond with what we call shifts in consciousness. And one of the best ways that we try and explain it is the interplay between waking state, dream state, and dreamless state. Because what we're doing when we're making these shifts in consciousness is we're taking our conscious mind from one dimension of our makeup and putting it into another dimension. And the nothing in excess part is that these other dimensions are on different time scales. So when you're trying to balance, like you said, your energy centers, you're actually moving consciousness from one dimension of your makeup to another dimension of your makeup to another dimension of your makeup. And when you're in the physical level, it's going to require more time. And when you go into the mental level, it'll be less time. And when you go into the spirit level, it will be even less time. And that's one of the reasons why I find, like we talk about, the labyrinth is just such a fabulous tool, because it breaks down the ratios of as you're going from your lower levels of consciousness to your higher levels of consciousness, because the paths keep getting smaller. So the duration of time that you place in that, the amount of focus you put on that department is in proportion to the way that you would break down the distribution of your energy in order to affect, perfect balance.
Oh, I think that's a good place to pause from our program for a few moments to hear a word from our sponsors. So, listeners, we will be with you shortly.
If you are looking for a Samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Kriya Yoga Series 1 live classes and videos. Get your arms around the spiritual science of Kriya Yoga.
The intention of why we practice is to embody spirit, to feel connected to the life force.
Kriya Yoga Asana live classes and videos. A cosmically engineered system of exercises to initiate apotheosis. A system of exercises engineered for dining and dancing at the Cosmic Ballroom. Kriya Yoga Series 2 live classes and videos. A practice in open forum designed to facilitate positive growth of consciousness. Get your Labyrinth video.
I find the positive side of it is it pulls a lot of things together.
Kriya Yoga Mantra and Meditation. With repetition comes absorption. Pray on prana and become divine.
At the same time, we all have a unique talent and gift to give back to the universe.
Private sessions. The mysteries of the universe have always been handed down verbally from teacher to student. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you are listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I have a question for you. We talked about Dharma earlier. So, what are the telltale signs that would let us know, give us the awareness that we are on our dharmic path?
Yeah, probably one of the things is I always like that whole thing Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. If all your ducks are in order, then your life, I think, can be somewhat magical. But that also takes a lot of awareness. And so again, for a lot of us, there's going to be a lot of trial and error. Oftentimes, there's a collision between this unique talent and what we think, other people want us to do, and not really individuating like we talked in earlier shows. And so, but if you are keeping step with your development, then of course, you have this strong sense of self. You're able to be sensitive enough to hear the call and strong enough to walk a solitary path. And probably one of the reasons why you have that capability is because you have the benefit of this internal support. The whole thing of prana, Uranus, the power of the creative principle, this light that passes through opaque objects. It's when matter and mind come together with this secret source of sustenance that our whole sense of self starts to transcend the limits of our bodies. We align ourselves with this part of ourselves that is beyond physical reality. And again, with that comes calmness, confidence, clarity.
Now, do we have a dharmic duty not just to ourselves but to family? And then you had mentioned earlier in the description that we have a collective duty as well.
Right. Well, just like you're saying, things are happening on 3 levels. So I've got a responsibility to me, my physical body. I've got a responsibility to my immediate surroundings, my family, friends, my environment, and then also, this whole sense of connectedness to the galaxy. I mean, the universe, to this concept of spirit. And so things are happening on these different levels. And one of the benefits that comes with this internal connection that we call Kriya Yoga, that your mind starts to open, that you expand your field of awareness. Your whole sense of perception starts to change. Kind of like the same way when you're climbing a mountain. That as when you first start on the ground and you look around and you're seeing all kinds of trees and stuff, and then as you start to go up the trail, if you come to some kind of an opening and you look out, and all of a sudden now it's like your elevation has changed, but it's also changed, the vista. It has changed, how you see that same environment. And so in a way, this expanded sense of awareness does the same thing for us.
So how long does this energy of the new moon, how long does it last? Is there a certain type of time where that is going to be more powerful?
Well, the new moon is pretty fleeting, that you got about 2.5 days on either side for this particular configuration. But the thing, like we talk about, is what we look for are the solar eclipses. The new moons that are solar eclipses, those are the ones that you're on a 2-year, 2-month, and 28-day cycle. But this one here, it won't have that big of a lasting impression. But if you're mindful, it's an opportunity for you to start to join the interplay between your lower mind and your higher mind, for you to start to maybe get a glimpse of a broader sense of reality, understanding maybe how reality is taking place, that things are happening on these 3 different levels simultaneously. And how we think is what we become, that thought is an energy capable of producing effects. And again, that it's all measurable based on the amount of strength we emit it with. So it's our belief that gives these thoughts the power to affect changes. But coming back to what you said, you have to start locally. You have to get the light in your soul, so that you can become this change that you want to see globally, collectively. It's kind of like lifeguards. I always judge my lifeguards by how well they can swim. That if you can't swim, you can't save yourself. You're going to be hard-pressed to try and pull somebody else out of the water, unless it's from the side of a pool.
Great. Well, we talked about earlier about being aware, especially of how we think. Well, yesterday I caught myself saying about the weather, and I said, well, it's not too bad outside. And then I was like, oh, no, what am I saying? So here's this patterning that you had mentioned earlier. So we've come in with all this programming, and it's challenging for us to try to overcome some of that patterning. So what should I do? How do I prevent myself from doing that again?
Well, again, it's the whole concept of practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect when practice is perfect. The first order of business is that you never want to beat yourself up. When you recognize that you have done something that is against your intention, what I do is I bookmark it, and then I don't beat myself up. I just say, what would I have done differently given the opportunity? then I format a different response. Something that would be, again, like we talked about, a positive image. Something positive about the weather. That it's fresh, it's clear, it's bright, it's wholesome. You know, some kind of image other than not bad. All right. So now once you start to change those responses to today is really crisp and fresh and, you know, inspiring kind of a day, now you've got a whole different image that you can record. And then through repetition will come absorption until eventually now that image will be the one that will be in your default memory pattern. So that when you step out and you have a similar condition, it will have now this other response that's added to it.
And then that's an exercise I can employ when I do anything. If I'm in a sauna posture and, you know, I'm talking about my right quad and why is it always doing that? Instead, I should just send positive energy to it and visualize it lengthening and strengthening or whatever. So it's that same exercise I should apply to all the departments of my life. Right?
Absolutely. And in fact, when you're at work and maybe you're talking to a customer and you say something and you think, oh boy, you know, I wish I didn't say that. You can actually, at the end of the day, rather than beating yourself up, what would I do differently? And you create a different response. And then that becomes part of your routine. You know, that you're constantly, it's being spiritual to me reminds me of gardening. That you don't just dig up the soil, fertilize the soil, prepare the soil, put some seeds down, water them, and walk away. That in order to maintain the garden, you have to continue to nurture what it is that you've planted, and also you have to constantly patrol the frontier of that garden because you're going to notice things are growing in there that you didn't plant. And the same is true with this human mind-body complex. It's what we were saying last week. We're constantly bombarded with negative imagery. And so a big part of your spiritual practice is patrolling the frontier of your consciousness, examining the petals of your mind, and looking for the weeds. And when you find them, you pull them out. And if you like what's growing, you continue to nurture it. But by constantly refreshing it, that's why I say the labyrinth is just such an amazing tool, because it gives you this organized way of looking at all of the different departments of your life and a way of distributing energy in a way that will affect the balance.
Well, I'm going to say I have some play to do. I was going to say I'm going to have some work to do with it, but I'm going to consider it more like play instead as being more positive, right? So I think it's about time we need to start closing down our program for today. So I would like to invite the listeners out there to visit the website. You can follow Swami on Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook as well. And also available are the online classes, too, that you can link through from the website, and that would take you to Powhal. So, but keep those comments and questions and curiosities coming, so we do enjoy hearing from you. And be sure to tune in to next week. We'll be discussing next week's Spiritual Advance. So, Swami, any final thoughts or comments you'd like to say about today's show or next week?
Well, again, I would like to invite everybody to join our Spiritual Advance and maybe take advantage of this new moon to start working on your unique talent and working on your conceptual framework about what you think life is all about. And if what we are talking about is of any interest to you, I would invite you to join us and employ some of our recommendations. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste, and I'll give it back to you.
Well, thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. I am Lisa Winton, and with me, Swami Jayananda will be signing off, so have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.